Look at the claustrophobic layers of buildings stacked against the hills of Shimla. For a 24-year-old junior software developer like Sahil, this dense terrain represents an aggressive, suffocating housing market. His entry-level salary simply couldn't compete with the exorbitant cost of rent in a prime tourist destination. He spent weeks scanning newspapers and online listings, hitting a wall of no vacancy signs and prices well out of his budget. Then, pinned to a mundane notice board, he found a bizarre, handwritten paper offering a room for an impossibly low rate, 2,000 rupees a month. There was exactly one condition attached to the lease. The notice read, "Raat ke baad bahar nikalna. Do not step outside after 12 a.m. Sahil actually laughed at it. To a rational mind, it sounded like the eccentric demand of a lonely landlord. He dialed the number and heard the deep, slow voice of an old woman, telling him the room was ready. The immediate relief of solving his financial crisis completely overshadowed the inherent danger of a stranger dictating a bizarre midnight curfew. When your starting salary can't cover a roof over your head, your brain develops a dangerous blind spot. Economic desperation is the perfect psychological mechanism. It forces a victim to willingly ignore glaring supernatural red flags just to secure a place to sleep. Sahil arrived at the address tucked away behind Rajpur Road. This isolated, decaying stone and wood haveli stood in stark contrast to the bustling, modern city center he had just left. It looked like a forgotten relic, complete with iron snake motifs on the doors and broken windows. The door opened entirely on its own, revealing the landlady, Savitri Devi. She wore a pristine white sari, but her physical appearance carried a terrifying anomaly. Her eyes were entirely black. There was absolutely no white visible in them at all. She led him past 14 closed doors to the only vacant space, room 13. The moment Sahil stepped across the threshold, the heavy door slammed and sealed shut behind him, cutting off his only exit. Inside, the room was sparse, but the walls carried a desperate history. Sahil noticed deep, frantic gouges carved into the plaster. They weren't tool marks. They were the unmistakable, desperate scratches of human fingernails. Hidden among the scratches was a specific, frantic warning left by the previous occupant. Carved into the wall in tiny English letters was a clear instruction: "Don't sleep here." Savitri Devi casually dismissed the previous tenant as crazy, noting that he had simply gone away. Sahil had entered a space where his financial agreement had evolved into a physical trap. Deciding to test out at least one night, Sahil lay down at 9 p.m. At 11:15, sleep was impossible. The room had dropped to an unnatural freezing temperature, as if an invisible air conditioner was blasting directly onto his bed. Then the auditory anomalies began. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed from directly above him. Sack, 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 pacing slowly, deliberately, from one corner of his ceiling to the exact opposite side, and back again. Sahil initially assumed it was the landlady. But look at this haveli's cross-section. Savitri Devi explicitly said there are no rooms upstairs. It's a single-story structure. The ceiling above Sahil is the roof. Whatever was pacing up there was walking on thin air. Looking for a rational explanation, Sahil peered out his window into the dense forest outside. Instead of an answer, he found a pale, motionless figure standing deep in the trees. It wasn't moving. It was just staring directly up at his specific window. Panic setting in, Sahil checked his watch. It was 11:58 p.m. With 2 minutes left until the midnight rule took effect, he backed away from the glass and hid entirely under his covers. These impossible sensory details systematically dismantle Sahil's rational defenses. By projecting spatial impossibilities, the room becomes a place where physical laws no longer apply. Sahil drifted off, only to be jolted awake at exactly 3 a.m. The freezing cold was gone. The room was pitch black and suffocatingly hot, radiating heat like an industrial oven. And the air was thick with a new, distinct stench, the smell of burning hair. He reached for the light switch, but the power was dead. He grabbed his phone. He knew the battery was at 100%, but the screen refused to emit a single pixel of light. Technology had completely failed him. In the absolute dark, Sahil realized he wasn't alone. He heard ragged, heavy breathing. And it wasn't coming from the hallway or the ceiling. It was originating from the empty space immediately beside his bed. Terrified, he called out into the dark. The breathing only moved closer. Sahil blindly reached his hand forward into the blackness and gripped something physical. A hand, ice-cold, incredibly thin, and ending in unnaturally long fingernails. He yanked his arm back in horror. The instant he let go, the silent room erupted. Dozens of children began laughing, the sound echoing and overlapping from every single corner of his tiny room simultaneously. The transition at 3 a.m. signals the end of the psychological buildup. The entity has moved from the corners of the room to the space immediately beside him. When Sahil opened his eyes next, morning sunlight was streaming through the window. The room felt entirely normal. But the physical evidence remained. 3 fresh, deep fingernail scratches were carved violently into his own arm, and the wall carried a new message. Directly beneath the old tenant's desperate English warning, fresh letters had been gouged into the plaster. It read, "Abhi bhi yaha hai," still here. He found Savitri Devi calmly drinking tea in the hall. When he demanded to know what was in his room, her black eyes locked onto his. She confessed that the entity was the previous tenant's daughter. Her father had come to visit her, and now his soul was permanently trapped inside the walls of room 13. A voice whispered directly into Sahil's ear, begging him to stay for just one more night. Sahil didn't hesitate. He abandoned his luggage, threw his entire body weight against the jammed front door until the wood splintered, and fled Shimla entirely. He quit his job and left the mountains behind. By putting hundreds of miles between himself and Rajpur Road, Sahil falsely deduced that he had won. He believed that by severing his geographic ties to the physical architecture of the Haveli, he had successfully outrun the trap. 6 months later, Sahil had established a new baseline of safety. He was living in a completely different city, far away from the steep hills of Shimla, sleeping soundly in a modern, secure apartment, until his eyes snapped open in the dark. He glanced at the clock. It was exactly 3 a.m. Instantly, the temperature in his new bedroom plummeted to freezing, and the unmistakable stench of burning hair filled his lungs. Paralyzed, Sahil listened. The heavy, ragged breathing had returned. It was right beside him, occupying the empty space in a room that was supposed to be completely safe. He closed his eyes, took a long breath, and slowly turned his head. Carved into the pristine wall of his new apartment was a final, damning message. Humne kaha tha, sirf ek raat aur. We told you, just one more night. The haunting of room 13 exists independently of the Haveli's architecture. Sahil discovered that once a space claims you, the geometry of your new home offers no protection.